The other day, I got a comment that I never actually addressed or talked about. I just kind of let it slide underneath, and I allowed it to ultimately fade into oblivion and just didn't acknowledge it. It was a young man who approached and told me, stop using ad hominems, in your criticisms of people and your debates with them. Now, there's something that really needs to be stated here. I agree with the hierarchy of disagreement. Um, I feel that the quality of discourse on the internet is actually pretty shit. And it's one of the ways that I disagree with a lot of it. This article would be pretty helpful to understanding exactly like my meta criticism, critique of critique. The web is turning writing into a conversation. 20 years ago, writers wrote and readers read. The web lets readers respond, and increasingly they do in comments, threads, and forums, and in their own blog post. Many who respond to something disagree with it. That's to be expected. Agreeing tends to motivate people less than disagreeing, and when you agree, there's less to say. You could expand on something the author said, but has probably already explored the most interesting implications. When you disagree, you're entering territory that he might not have explored. The result is that there's a lot more disagreeing going on, especially measured by the word. That doesn't necessarily mean people are getting angrier, although they are. The structural change in the way we communicate is enough to account for it, but it's not anger that's driving an increase in disagreement, but there's danger that the increase in disagreement will make people angrier, particularly online where it's easy to say things you'd never say face to face. If we're all going to be disagreeing more, we should be careful to do it well. What does it mean to disagree well? Well, most readers can tell the difference between mere name calling and a carefully reasoned refutation, but I think that it would help to put names on the intermediary stages. So here's an attempt at a disagreement hierarchy. Name calling. This is the lowest form of disagreement, and you've probably and it's also the most common. We've all seen comments like this, misspelt, which was a YOUR but with an apostrophe, but for the R. Anyways, on the RE, like it's important to realize that this is more that more articulate name calling has just as little weight. A comment like the author is a self-important dilettante is really nothing more than a pretentious version of "you are a fag." You know, it's the same level of quality. Then you've got the ad hominem. An ad hominem attack is not quite as weak as mere name calling. It might actually carry some weight. For example, if a senator wrote articles saying salaries should be increased, one could respond, "Of course he would say that. He's a senator." That wouldn't necessarily refute the author's argument, but it might at least be relevant to the case. It's still a very weak form of disagreement, though. It's if there's something wrong with the senator's argument, then you should say what it is, and if there isn't, what difference does it make that he's a senator? Saying that the author lacks the authority to write about a topic is a variant of an ad hominem and is a particularly useless sort, because good ideas often come from outsiders. The question is whether the author is correct or not. If his lack of authority caused him to make those mistakes, point those out. If it didn't, well, it's not a problem. That level two is responding to the tone. The next level up, we see responses to the writing rather than the writer. The lowest form of these is to disagree with the author's tone. I can't believe the author dismisses intelligent design in such a cavalier fashion. Though better than attacking the author, this is still a weak form of disagreement. It matters much more whether the author is wrong or right than what his tone is, especially since the tone is so hard to judge. Someone who's a chip on their shoulder about some topic might be offended by a tone that to other readers seemed neutral. So it's the worst thing you can say about someone is to criticize the tone. You're not saying much. Is the author flippant but correct? Better than grave and wrong. And if the author is incorrect somewhere, say where. Then there's got, stage three, which is, in this stage, we finally get responses to what was said rather than how or by whom. The lowest form of response to an argument is to simply state the opposing case with little or no supporting evidence. This is often combined with the DH level 2 statements, as in, I can't believe the author dismisses intelligent design in such a cavalier fashion. Intelligent design is a legitimate scientific theory. Like, I'm reading that, I'm like, no, it isn't, but whatever. Contradiction can have some weight. Sometimes merely name calling, it merely stating the opposing case or stated explicitly is enough to see that's right, but usually evidence will help. I don't want to get into the evidence that, of my comment that intelligent design is not a legitimate scientific theory. I don't want to get into that tonight. Like, I'm not doing that. That's a whole other discussion, and maybe I will get into it at some other time, but not tonight. At level 4, we reached the first form of convincing disagreement, an actual counter argument. Forms up to this point can usually be ignored as proving nothing. The counter argument might prove something. See, my goal isn't to prove that it's not a scientific theory tonight. My goal is to talk about the low quality of disagreement that we're seeing. Forms up to this point can usually be ignored as proving nothing. Counter argument might prove something. The problem is it's hard to say exactly what. Counter-argument is a contradiction plus reasoning and/or evidence. When aimed squarely at the original argument, it can be convincing, but unfortunately, it's common for counter-arguments to be aimed at something slightly different. More often than not, two people arguing passionately about something are actually arguing about two different things. Sometimes they even agree with one another, but are so caught up in their squabble they don't realize it. There could be legitimate reason for arguing against something slightly different from what the author said. When you do that, they feel you missed the heart of the matter. But when you do that, you should explicitly say that you're doing it, and then you finally have, an actual refutation. The most convincing form of disagreement is a refutation. It's the rarest because it takes the most work. Indeed, the disagreement of a hierarchy forms a kind of pyramid in the sense that the higher you go, the fewer instances of it you find. To refute someone, you probably have to quote them. You have to find a smoking gun, a passage in whatever you disagree with that you feel is mistaken, and then explain why it's mistaken. If you can't find an actual quote to disagree with, you may be arguing with a straw man position. A refutation entails quoting doesn't necessarily imply refutation. Some writers quote parts of things they disagree with to give the appearance of a legitimate refutation, then follow up with a response as low as 0 or 3, and then there's finally DH6, which is usually what I actually aim for. You know, if I try to disagree with somebody, I very much so try to go here and aim at this. Now, I might combine this with a DH0 in the whole thing because I guess I am judgmental, but I also understand the value of going for, the real goal here, which is the force of refutation depends on what you refute. The most powerful form of disagreement is to refute someone's central point. Even as high as DH5, we still see some deliberate dishonesty, as when someone picks out minor points of an argument and then refutes those. Sometimes the spirit of this is when which what is done makes it more of a sophisticated form of ad hominem than actual refutation. For example, correcting someone's grammar or harping on minor mistakes in names or numbers. Unless the opposing argument actually depends on such things, the only purpose of correcting them is to discredit one's opponent. Truly refuting someone requires one to refute the central point, or at least one of them, and that means one has to commit explicitly to what the central point is. So a truly effective refutation would look like this. The author's main point seems to be X, as he says, quotation, but this is wrong for the following reasons. The quotation you point out as mistaken needs to be the actual statement of the author's main point. It's enough to refute something it depends upon. Now, we have classifying forms of disagreement. What good is that? One thing the disagreement hierarchy doesn't give us is a way of picking a winner. DH levels near disagreement levels, but merely describe the form of a statement, whether it not whether it's correct. A DH6 response could still be completely mistaken. So why DH levels don't set a low bound on the convincingness of a reply, they do set an upper bound. A DH6 response may be unconvincing, but a DH2 or lower response is always unconvincing. The most obvious advantage of classifying the forms of disagreement is that it will help people to evaluate what they read. In particular, it will help them see through intellectually dishonest arguments. An eloquent speaker or writer can give the impression of vanquishing an opponent merely by using forceful words. In fact, that is probably the defining quality of a demagogue. By giving names to the defining different forms of disagreement, we give critical readers a pen for popping such balloons. Such labels might help writers too. Most intellectual dishonesty is unintentional. Someone arguing against the tone of something he disagrees with may actually believe that he's really saying something. Zooming out and looking at his current position on the disagreement hierarchy may inspire him to try moving up to a counter argument or refutation. But the greatest benefit of disagreeing well is not that it will make conversations better, but that it will make the people who have them happier. If you study conversations, you will find that there's a lot more meanness down at DH1 level than there's up in DH6. You don't have to be mean when you have a real point to make. In fact, you don't want to. If you have something real to say, being mean just gets in the way. If moving up in the disagreement hierarchy makes people less mean, that will make them happier. Most people really don't really enjoy being mean. They do it because they can't help it. Now, as for me, I don't know. I mean, my willingness to be an asshole largely depends on how I perceive you as an individual, and how what my evaluation is of you as a person and your character and how I feel about you, and also what kind of reciprocal relationship we've built up with each other over time. I can be very insulting in how I go about arguing with people, but that is largely due to an element of personal disgust for a lot of what I see going on. I feel that there, and have for a long time, there's a lot of people with some really toxic beliefs floating around. I unfortunately have been aware of all the bigotry that is prevalent in our society. And as to this man's comment, and this individual, I might use insults, but I usually try not to let my insulting language descend into a state in which all I do is insult the person on the other side. I am ultimately interested. See, I guess my stance comes from a position of and a place of I've given up on convincing the people I disagree with the most, and I'm really only interested in showing up in those spaces to remind people that there are people who disagree with them, and reach out to the people that might be on the fence and remind them and encourage them to get pulled into it. You know what I mean? Like I'm not really there anymore to from this misguided place of trying to convince somebody that is massively wrong about something, that they're wrong about it. I have in a huge sense given up on people in that regard. I'm not interested in doing that. I regard that as like trying to play pigeon chess with somebody, and it's just not worth my time or effort. So what I will do is show up and insult and provide good constructive arguments and solid evidence that and things that might serve to arm from an intellectual perspective those that are against their position. Like I don't really show up to convince that person that they're wrong about what they believe anymore. I'm not interested because I just don't. I've never seen it happen. I've never watched somebody come to the realization that they were wrong about something, or a debate taking place on the internet where two people were butting heads and eventually one of them prevailed over the other. Usually they just walk away from each other both equally convinced of their own bullshit. So what's the fucking point? It doesn't lead to anywhere productive. So when I show up, I usually just and try to arm anybody who agrees with me and help make them better at, at debating, so that they do a better job of convincing anybody that might be sitting on the fence. That's that's really all that I do. And as a consequence of that, yeah, I can sometimes hurl names out and insult people, but I guess you could say that I'm not really in it for that. I'm not really in it to insult people, and I guess I just find a joy in insulting people that I don't like, or who have an opinion that I find, and feel is vile. I find some sadistic pleasure in it, but I'm not. I guess you could say that I'm not really an asshole. I'm just somebody that enjoys being an asshole to people that suck, people that are ghoulish. I like being cruel to cruel people.